A buried crime is clawing its way back to light. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I am your host, Vela. Comment where you're watching. I treasure every message. Let's begin. It was on a damp, moonless evening in early October that tragedy struck Belgrave Court, one of Surrey's most impeccably maintained estates. The lawns, expansive, geometric, and trimmed to within a hair's precision, gleamed faintly with mist, while the tall windows of the manor glowed with the warm light of a dinner party that would soon be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Inside, among crystal glasses and hushed laughter, the elite of London society had gathered for Lady Eleanor Ashcombe's annual autumn gala. The event was known for its elegance, its exclusivity, and, if one believed gossip columns, for the subtle rivalry and quiet scandals that simmered beneath its polished exterior. Everyone who mattered was in attendance, everyone except the man who would soon become its grim centerpiece. Shortly before 11 o'clock, a scream sliced through the genteel murmur of conversation. It came from the East Wing. Guests froze mid-sentence, heads turning sharply as the cry echoed through the ornate corridors. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then came frantic footsteps, shouts for help, and the sudden clamor of chaos erupting where moments earlier there had been champagne and chamber music. At the source of the disturbance, past a half-open door embroidered with Lady Ashcombe's initials, lay the body of Simon Wyndham, financier, philanthropist, and one of the most controversial guests invited that year. He was sprawled across the velvet carpet of the private study, his face twisted in shock, one hand reaching toward the telephone on the desk as though caught in a final, futile attempt to summon aid. A thin gash marked his temple, and the heavy crystal decanter lying a few feet away suggested all too clearly what had served as the murder weapon. Some people gasped, others whispered. A few concealed expressions of something dangerously close to satisfaction. Lady Ashcombe herself, pale as the pearls around her neck, covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Inspector Haverton, who happened to be among the guests, immediately seized control of the room with brusque authority. "No one is to leave the manor," he barked. "This is now a crime scene." Servants scurried to lock the doors. Guests withdrew to the grand hall, clustering in uneasy little groups. The murmurs grew. Simon had enemies. Simon had secrets. Simon had been overheard arguing earlier, yes, quite loudly. Within the hour, the list of people who might have wanted Wyndham dead seemed almost embarrassingly long. But the greatest disturbance came not from the murder itself, but from the realization that the second telephone in the study, the one Wyndham had used mere minutes before his death, still lay off the hook. And someone had heard what transpired. Someone who, according to the breathless young footman who discovered the body, was already on their way to Belgrave Court at Lady Ashcombe's urgent request. A small, meticulous, famously exacting Belgian detective. A man who trusted his little grey cells over all else. Hercule Poirot. The moment the telegram confirming his arrival was read aloud, a ripple of emotion passed through the gathering, relief, fear, resentment, and, in at least two faces, unmistakable dread. For among those glittering guests, one person had silenced Simon Wyndham forever, and Hercule Poirot was coming to uncover the truth they thought they had buried. The announcement of Poirot's imminent arrival acted like a stone dropped into already troubled waters. Conversation broke into ripples of speculation, scandal, and fear that darted from guest to guest across the great hall of Belgrave Court. "He's that detective, isn't he?" murmured Mrs. Beatrice Lytton, wife of the political journalist, her gloved hand clutching a lace handkerchief. "The one from the papers. Scotland Yard consults him." "Not from the Yard," corrected her husband, Charles Lytton, smoothing his moustache with absent-minded irritation. "Independent, foreign, very particular, so I'm told." "Foreign and particular," Beatrice whispered, as though this combination were barely decent. At the far end of the hall, Julia Wyndham sat apart from the others on a small gilt chair, her back rigid, her eyes fixed on an invisible point beyond the marble fireplace. She was Simon Wyndham's younger sister, recently widowed herself, and now doubly shadowed by death. Her face, pale and fine-boned, bore no trace of tears, only a stunned immobility. Beside her, Sir Hugo Marsh shifted his weight restlessly. His broad, ruddy face was usually arranged into an expression of hearty complacency, but tonight it was pinched and wary. Rumor had it that he and Simon had parted on less than amicable terms over a failed investment scheme. Lady Ashcombe, having temporarily subdued her initial agitation, moved among her guests like a ghost of her usual gracious self, murmuring apologies for the circumstances with a strained, brittle smile. Her son, Lionel Ashcombe, stood nearby, hands in his pockets, regarding the scene with an air of cool detachment that verged on insolence. Inspector Haverton, having given instructions to his constables and secured the study, now stood by the entrance, consulting his watch with growing impatience. The man had the air of being perpetually 2 steps behind his own temper. A low roar of engines from the gravel drive outside announced the arrival of a motor car. There was a collective, almost unconscious drawing of breath. The doors to the great hall opened, admitting a gust of damp air and a small, compact figure in an immaculate dark overcoat, the collar fastidiously brushed free of even the suggestion of dust. His hat was set at a precise angle. He removed it with a small bow to Lady Ashcombe, revealing a head of egg-shaped perfection, the hair carefully arranged. His moustaches, remarkable, luxuriant, and as meticulously groomed as the rest of him, twitched faintly as his eyes swept the room. "I am at your service, madame," said Hercule Poirot, inclining his head. "You have had the misfortune, I learn, of a most grave tragedy." Lady Ashcombe's control wavered. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming so quickly. It is all so dreadful. Simon, Mr. Wyndham, he's been killed in my house." Poirot's eyes softened. "Courage, Lady Ashcombe. We will bring order from this chaos, oui? But first, I would speak with the officer of the law who has already taken charge." Inspector Haverton came forward, shoulders squared. He was a tall man, with a strong jaw and a slight frown that seemed permanently etched between his brows. "Haverton, Metropolitan Police," he said. "I was a guest this evening. As it happens, I saw the body when it was first found. My men are already examining the study." Poirot nodded courteously. "Then you will have the kindness, Inspector, to tell me what you have observed, but not here, in the presence of so many anxious ears. Lady Ashcombe, if you would allow us the use of a small sitting room." "Yes, of course," she said quickly. "The morning room is just along the corridor." As they left, the murmurs thickened behind them. "Do you think he will want to search our rooms?" whispered Beatrice Lytton. "He may want to search our souls," Charles replied dryly, "which ought to trouble this company rather more." In the morning room, a delicate pastel space with French windows now shuttered against the night. Lady Ashcombe, Poirot, and Inspector Haverton took their places. Poirot chose a chair with its back to the wall, his preference for command of the room unmistakable. "Begin at the beginning, if you please," Poirot said mildly. "The time, the circumstances, who discovered the body, the order, it is important." Haverton cleared his throat. The dinner concluded around 10:30. Guests dispersed for cards, billiards, or conversation in the drawing-room. I was with Lytton and Sir Hugo. At approximately 10 minutes to 11, a young footman, Thomas, I think, burst in, shouting that Mr. Wyndham was on the floor in the study, bleeding. Lady Ashcombe shuddered. Poirot inclined his head sympathetically but did not interrupt. "I went at once," Haverton continued. "We found Wyndham lying near the desk. Head wound, blunt force trauma. A heavy cut-glass decanter on the carpet, broken at the neck, blood on the remaining glass, and some on the carpet fibers. No sign of forced entry. Window latched from the inside. Door was ajar. Was Mr. Wyndham alone? Poirot asked. Yes, though someone had clearly been with him earlier. There were 2 glasses on the desk, one with whiskey left in it, the other empty. We'll have them tested. Poirot's moustaches twitched faintly. Eh bien, and the telephone? Off the hook, Haverton said. We replaced it. Lady Ashcombe informed me that she had spoken to Mr. Wyndham only a short time before. And then she called you, Poirot, rather quick thinking, if I may say so. Lady Ashcombe clasped her hands. Simon sounded agitated. He asked if he could speak to me privately after the guests had retired. He said there was something he had to put right. I thought it was some tedious financial matter. Then she broke off, eyes filling. Poirot waited patiently, allowing her a moment. You heard anything of the attack through the telephone, madame? He asked gently. A sound, a cry, perhaps? Nothing clearly, she whispered. There was a sort of thud. I called his name, but there was no reply. And then the line went dead. I told Thomas to fetch Inspector Haverton at once and sent another servant to check the study. Poirot sat very still, fingertips pressed together. So, we have a man who is troubled, who requests a private conversation, who intends to put something right, and shortly afterward, he is dead. His eyes flicked to Haverton. You have already formed a hypothesis, perhaps? Haverton's jaw tightened. The man had enemies. That much is obvious. Wyndham's investments have ruined more than one person in this room. If you ask me, there's no shortage of suspects. I'll take statements, check alibis, examine physical traces. We'll know soon enough who had the opportunity. And the motive, Poirot murmured. Haverton lifted his shoulders in a half-shrug. Revenge, money, fear, take your pick. Poirot smiled faintly. Indeed, Inspector. Indeed. Motive, opportunity, means. They are the 3 legs of the stool, are they not? But there is also a 4th thing, less easy to see. The nature of the act, the psychology. Without it, one balances on air. He rose, smoothing an invisible crease from his sleeve. Now, if you please, I should like to see the room of the tragedy. After that, we will have the bringing together of your guests, Lady Ashcombe. It will be well that I see them all assembled, ensemble, before we separate the threads. The guests, Lady Ashcombe repeated, apprehension in her voice. Mais oui, said Poirot. We are at Belgrave Court, on a night of rain, with a murder in a locked house. No one has gone. No one may go. Therefore, his eyes gleamed, very bright and very sharp. The killer is among us already. It is as simple and as difficult as that. Poirot's words lingered in the air like the soft toll of a distant bell, their certainty both reassuring and unsettling. Lady Ashcombe led the way through the quiet, carpeted corridor toward the east wing, where the study waited behind a cordon of uniformed constables. The once harmonious atmosphere of Belgrave Court had curdled into something taut and uneasy. The muted footsteps of the 3 figures seemed too loud against the hush of the darkened hallways. As they approached the study, Poirot's pace slowed. He tilted his head slightly, observing not just the room ahead, but the subtle details that others, in their haste or agitation, would have missed. A faint smear of mud on the base of a column. A wilted petal from a decorative flower arrangement crushed near the threshold. He frowned thoughtfully, then entered the room with a small nod to the constable on duty. The study was a handsome chamber, furnished in mahogany and leather, with dark paneling that gave it a dignified gravitas. The air still held the faint scent of cigar smoke and whiskey. The electric lamps cast a steady glow over the central scene. The desk, the broken decanter, and the faint outline where Simon Wyndham's body had been before it was removed to an adjoining room. Poirot approached the desk first. A silver cigarette case lay open, its contents seemingly undisturbed. papers were stacked neatly, except for one document that had been pulled slightly askew. Poirot did not touch it yet. Instead, he leaned forward and breathed out softly, as if testing the air. "An interesting room," he murmured. "So tidy, so ordered, and yet something here does not please the eye." Inspector Haverton moved beside him. We looked for signs of struggle, nothing obvious. "Perhaps the struggle was not of the physical sort," Poirot replied. His attention shifted to the 2 whiskey glasses, one empty, the other half full. The empty glass bore a faint fingerprint near the rim, visible only when the light struck it at a certain angle. Poirot's mustaches gave a small, satisfied tremor. "Inspector," he said softly, "your constables, did they touch these glasses?" "No," Haverton said. "We've left them for the forensic team." Poirot nodded. "Bon. Then we know that Mr. Wyndham had a visitor shortly before his death, a visitor who drank with him, but perhaps not as heartily. The glass that is empty, it belonged to the one who was tense, hurried. The other? To the host who sipped more slowly. And see, the ashtray. 2 different kinds of ash." Lady Ashcombe gave a small gasp. "Simon didn't smoke cigarettes." "Just so, madame. Therefore, his guest did." Poirot moved to the shattered decanter next. He knelt carefully, his eyes tracing the arc of broken glass. One piece was lodged several feet from the others, farther than would be expected if dropped in a simple fall. "A swing, not a fall," Poirot murmured. "The murderer was standing here. No, a little more to the left, yes, where the carpet has the slightest indentation. And Wyndham, he was perhaps turning toward the telephone when he was struck. There is a desperation in the reaching hand, is there not?" Lady Ashcombe, pale and trembling, pressed a hand to her throat. "Monsieur Poirot, must you—" He straightened at once, offering her a gentle bow. "Forgive me, madame. It is not my wish to distress you, only to observe." He paused, letting her breathe, then continued more softly. "You told me earlier that Mr. Wyndham wished to put something right. Were you aware of any business difficulty he had recently encountered? A quarrel, perhaps?" Lady Ashcombe hesitated. "Simon did have entanglements. He was not always the most prudent in his dealings. But I never imagined, never, that they might lead to anything like this." Poirot studied her face, noting the flicker of something, fear or guilt or perhaps simply shock. He said nothing further on that subject. Instead, he turned his gaze to the rug beneath the desk. A small patch near the corner had been brushed recently, the pile flattened in a manner subtly different from the surrounding fibers. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Inspector," he said quietly, "was anything taken from this room before your arrival?" "No," Haverton replied. "Nothing I know of." Poirot tapped his fingers gently together. "Then someone attempted to conceal something here. Only attempted, I think. Not successfully." He lifted a corner of the rug delicately. Beneath it, barely visible even in the bright electric light, was a tiny fragment of torn paper, so small it might have escaped even a meticulous search. Poirot eased it free and examined it in his palm. "Ah," he said softly. "Just a corner, nothing readable. But it tells me that a document was destroyed, hurriedly, perhaps after Mr. Wyndham was struck. Why destroy a paper, unless it implicated the murderer or exonerated the victim?" Lady Ashcombe sank into a chair. "This is terrible, all of it. Whoever did this, whoever was here with him, must still be inside the house." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Yes, madame, that is true." He moved once more to the desk, his eyes sweeping its surface with renewed intensity. One drawer was locked. Poirot tested it lightly. "Inspector," he said, "I would be most grateful if you could procure the key." Haverton frowned. "We didn't find it on the body." "Then we must find out who did," Poirot replied. Lady Ashcombe let out a faint cry. Simon always kept the key on his watch chain. Ah, Poirot said. But when the body was found? Haverton exhaled sharply. There was no key on him. Poirot clasped his hands together with a small, decisive motion. Then we have the first small truth. The killer took it. Lady Ashcombe stared at him, stricken. But why? Poirot met her gaze steadily. Because, madame, whoever killed Simon Wyndham needed to hide something from that drawer, and whatever it was, it is important enough to kill for. He paused, listening to the muted hum of voices drifting faintly from the distant hall. And so, he said softly, we must now speak to your guests, all of them, before the night grows any older. He glanced once more around the room, then stepped back. For now, this chamber has told us all it can. But the people of Belgrave Court, they will tell us much more. The great hall had grown noticeably quieter by the time Poirot, Lady Ashcombe, and Inspector Haverton returned from the study. The guests gathered in small clusters beneath the chandeliers looked up as one when the trio appeared. A hush fell instantly, like a curtain drawn across a stage. Fear, suspicion, and impatience simmered just beneath the polished surface of their expressions. Poirot stepped forward with a calm, almost soothing composure. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room, "I thank you for your patience. I regret that our evening together should be under such dark circumstances, yet it is necessary, most necessary, that we speak with one another tonight." Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. Sir Hugo Marsh coughed into his fist. Julia Wyndham shifted stiffly in her seat. Poirot continued, "Our gathering here is not merely for form, you understand. A man has been killed, and the one who struck the fatal blow is here among us. No guest has left, no outsider has entered. Therefore, we are a closed circle." Lionel Ashcombe lifted a brow. "Are we to take that literally, Monsieur Poirot? That one of our own number is a murderer?" Poirot inclined his head. "When the doors of a house are locked, monsieur, and the crime happens within, it is a conclusion most natural." A ripple passed through the room. Shock from some, indignation from others. Beatrice Lytton pressed her handkerchief dramatically to her chest, as though on the verge of swooning. But Charles Lytton merely snorted. It was bound to come to this. Wyndham was not a man short on enemies. It would have been a miracle if someone hadn't tried to throttle him sooner. "Charles," Beatrice hissed. "Forgive me," Poirot said mildly, "but Monsieur Lytton speaks a truth worth noting. There are many among you who had disagreements, financial, personal, or otherwise, with the late Mr. Wyndham." Julia Wyndham stiffened. "You make it sound as though Simon lived his life provoking violence." Poirot's gaze softened. "Not so, mademoiselle. Only that he was a man who left strong impressions upon others. Often such impressions come with passions, regret, resentment, or fear. It is these passions, I think, that we must explore." Inspector Haverton stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Monsieur Poirot will be asking questions of each of you. I've arranged for a private room to be used for interviews. Until then, I ask that you remain here in the hall." Poirot nodded his thanks. "Yes, one by one you will speak with me. Only a brief talk, I assure you. In such moments it is not the length but the quality of the conversation that reveals the truth." He paused, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle. Then he turned slightly aside, his voice lowering as he addressed Haverton and Lady Ashcombe. "Before we begin," Poirot murmured, "there is one small detail. It is necessary that no one overhears the interviews. The murderer may grow uneasy. A guilty conscience, Inspector, is a most unpredictable companion." Haverton nodded grimly. "I'll station 2 constables outside the door." "1,000 thanks." Poirot stepped back toward the guests, his gaze sweeping across each face, measuring every flicker of emotion. Sir Hugo's uneasy perspiration, Lionel's boredom tinged with something harder, Julia's brittle composure, the Lyttons' strained bravado, the three other guests hovering on the periphery. Miss Valerie Penrose, the famous contralto with a reputation for costly lovers, Dr. Rowan Pierce, somber and inscrutable, and Mr. Felix Greymore, the art dealer whose suave confidence now sat slightly askew. Poirot's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. So many motives, so many secrets, and somewhere among them, one deadly lie. He motioned to Inspector Heverton. "We will begin with Miss Penrose, if you please." A murmur passed through the hall as the elegant singer stepped forward. She carried herself with theatrical poise, but even under her practiced charm there was an unmistakable tremor. Poirot led her toward the small drawing room set aside for interviews. The moment the door closed behind them, he adopted the quiet, focused manner of a man listening for the faintest discordant note in a piece of music. "Miss Penrose," he began gently, "you attended this evening's dinner with Mr. Felix Greymore, did you not?" Her chin lifted with a kind of defiant grace. "Felix invited me. Yes, I had no independent connection to Mr. Wyndham." "No? And yet you seemed troubled when the body was discovered." "Anyone would be troubled. It was horrible, a ghastly thing to see." Poirot observed her hands, slender, adorned with rings, resting tensely in her lap. "Were you acquainted with Mr. Wyndham in any business or personal capacity?" Her gaze flickered. "Not directly." "Indirectly, then." A pause, slight but telling. "I'd heard things," she said at last. "Rumors." Felix spoke of a disagreement he'd had with Wyndham. Some piece of art Mr. Wyndham wanted to acquire privately, without the usual channels. Felix refused. He can be very principled when it suits him. Poirot absorbed this calmly. "And you yourself? No argument, no emotional history with Mr. Wyndham?" "None," she said. Too quickly. "I barely knew him." Poirot allowed the lie to pass, filing it away. "Thank you, mademoiselle. You may return to the hall." He stood as she left, his mind already assembling the threads. Fear from Miss Penrose. Concealment. And something else. Her reaction had been too swift when asked. Of her acquaintance with Wyndham. A woman accustomed to performance, yet tonight her timing faltered. The next interviews followed swiftly. Sir Hugo Marsh, blustering and evasive, insisting his argument with Wyndham earlier in the year was nothing but business friction. Charles Lytton, cool and guarded, hinting at an exposé he'd nearly written on Wyndham's dealings. Dr. Rowan Pierce, whose calm neutrality was so complete as to be suspicious in itself. Felix Greymore, suave but rattled, denying any hostile dealings while contradicting Miss Penrose's account in small but significant ways. Julia Wyndham, whose grief-stricken dignity could not quite mask a private terror. Lionel Ashcombe, who answered questions with an almost languid disinterest. Too controlled, too casual, and with each conversation, Poirot's understanding grew. By the time he returned to the great hall, the storm outside had intensified, wind rattling the tall windows like a restless spirit. The guests were restless too, watching Poirot with a mixture of dread and hope. He stood before them, his expression serene but sharpened by thought. "Merci, mes amis. The picture becomes clearer. There remain many things yet hidden, but the truth," she begins to whisper. He clasped his hands. "Now, I must trouble you a little more, for there is one person among you whose movements tonight require closer attention." The room tensed as one. Poirot's gaze moved slowly from face to face before settling, quietly, deliberately, on a single individual. "And so," he said softly, "I ask that you remain very calm while I inquire further of this matter." Poirot's gaze, steady and unblinking, settled upon Felix Greymore. The art dealer's polished composure cracked for the briefest instant. No more than a flicker around the eyes, a slight tightening of the mouth, but it was enough. A tremor passed through the onlookers like a shiver of wind through tall grass. Miss Penrose's hand flew to her throat. Sir Hugo muttered something under his breath. Julia Wyndham stared, rigid and pale. But Poirot made no dramatic accusation. He merely inclined his head. "Monsieur Gremore, a word with you, if you please." Felix swallowed, straightened his lapels, and stepped forward with all the dignity of a man determined not to show fear. "Certainly, if it will put an end to this circus." Poirot gave a small smile that did not reach his eyes. But of course. They moved to the far side of the hall, close enough for the guests to see but not hear. Haverton hovered nearby, arms folded, watchful. Poirot began in a gentle tone. "Monsieur, you have told me that you had no quarrel with Mr. Wyndham, yet Mademoiselle Penrose spoke of a matter concerning a private art sale." Felix's nostrils flared. Valerie misunderstood. Wyndham made inquiries, yes. He was interested in a particular piece, a small portrait from the early Dutch school. Nothing of consequence. "And yet," Poirot murmured, "you refused him. It wasn't for sale. Not even to a man accustomed to getting what he wants." Felix opened his mouth, then paused, realizing too late the trap he had nearly stepped into. "I refuse clients frequently. It is not unusual." Poirot nodded slowly. "And tonight? Did you speak with Mr. Wyndham?" "No." The answer came too swiftly. Poirot tilted his head. "Not at all? You did not pass near the study, perhaps on your way to the billiard room?" Felix hesitated. "I may have walked past the east corridor. Briefly." "Ah," Poirot said quietly. "Briefly. And yet you failed to mention it earlier." Felix's composure frayed visibly. "I didn't think it important." "But everything is important, Monsieur Gremore. In a house where a man has been murdered, the smallest movement, one step, one glance, may hold meaning." Felix shifted, his jaw tight. His eyes darted toward Miss Penrose as though seeking reassurance. She did not offer it. She seemed frozen, her expression unreadable. Poirot leaned slightly closer, his voice softening. "Monsieur, you are troubled. I see it. And when a man hides something, not guilt, perhaps, but sorrow, fear, or pride, it clouds the air around him. The truth, it is like a little bird trapped beneath your coat, beating its wings." Felix's mouth twisted. "What truth do you think I conceal?" Poirot regarded him steadily. "I do not think, monsieur. I observe. And I have observed tonight that you are not a man unused to desperation." Felix took a sharp step back. "You know nothing about me." "Au contraire, I know that you are a man who has lost much in recent months. A business faltering, a patron withdrawing support, debts that are inconvenient." Felix's face drained of color. How could you know that?" "I see it in the polish of your shoes, worn on the sides but shined with care, in the cuff of your sleeve, frayed but hidden beneath meticulous grooming. A man who maintains elegance with dwindling means, and a man in such a state might be tempted by the acquisition of valuable art, or by the desperate need to let go of it." Felix exhaled shakily. "Wyndham knew," he whispered. "He knew too much." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah, then there was a connection." Felix pressed trembling fingers to his temples. He'd threatened to expose something that would destroy me. But I swear I didn't kill him. I only wanted to speak with him, to reason with him. Where did this conversation take place? "In the conservatory," Felix said, voice cracking. "After dinner, he brushed me off, laughed at me, said he would deal with me later. But I never saw him again after that. I left him there." Poirot watched him closely, weighing not simply the man's words, but the panic behind them. "You are certain, Monsieur Gremore, you did not follow him to the East Wing?" "I swear it," Felix breathed. "I swear on everything But he stopped. A tremor passed through him. Poirot nodded almost imperceptibly. "Merci. You may rejoin the others." As Felix retreated, nearly stumbling in his haste, Poirot turned to find Haverton watching him with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "You think he's lying?" the inspector asked. Poirot shook his head thoughtfully. "He lies about some things, yes, but not, I think, about the murder. His fear tonight is not the fear of a man who struck a fatal blow. It is the fear of a man whose world was collapsing and who now fears it will bury him." Haverton frowned. "So he's not our man." "He is a man with secrets," Poirot said simply. "But murder? No. A murderer must possess a certain clarity of purpose. Monsieur Graymore only possesses chaos." Before Haverton could reply, a sudden crash sounded from the far corner of the hall. Glass shattering, a gasp of alarm. Guests turned as one, startled and frightened. Julia Wyndham stood beside a toppled side table, her face ashen, one hand clutching the back of a chair for support. But it wasn't the broken vase at her feet that had seized the room's attention. It was the envelope she had dropped. A sealed, cream-colored envelope addressed in Simon Wyndham's handwriting. Poirot reached her side immediately. She tried to hide it, but her trembling fingers betrayed her. "Please," Julia whispered, her voice thin and desperate. "I didn't want anyone to see." Poirot's eyes gleamed with a sudden, sharp intensity. "Mademoiselle, that envelope. When did your brother give it to you?" Her breath hitched. "He didn't." Poirot waited. "It was delivered to me this afternoon," she whispered. "Seaman sent it here, before he died." Every whisper in the hall went still. Poirot met her gaze. "Mademoiselle Wyndham," he said quietly, "I think it is time you told us what your brother feared and why he believed someone here wished him dead." Julia Wyndham blinked rapidly, as though fighting back a wave of emotion too powerful to withstand beneath so many watching eyes. The envelope trembled in her hand. Poirot, with infinite gentleness, guided her to a nearby chair. "Please, mademoiselle," he murmured, "take your time. The truth is delicate, like a flower pressed between the pages of a book, but tonight it must be opened." Inspector Haverton stood close by, arms folded but expression softened by concern. The guests, pretending not to stare, stared all the same. Julia lowered her gaze to the envelope. "I meant to destroy it," she whispered. "I shouldn't have kept it at all. I knew Simon was troubled, but I never imagined—" Poirot's voice was barely above a whisper. "You kept it because you feared what it might contain." She nodded once, painfully. "Yes." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "you did not destroy it. That, mademoiselle, tells me that somewhere in your heart you feared the truth, and feared, too, that it might be needed." Her hands closed protectively around the letter. "I don't want to read it." Her voice, though quiet, carried a childlike dread. "If I read it, then it becomes real." Poirot knelt before her, lowering himself into her line of sight. "My dear child, what is real has already visited us tonight. The letter is only its echo." A single tear escaped down Julia's cheek. Slowly, painfully, she broke the wax seal and unfolded the sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the first lines, and she flinched as if struck. Poirot waited. Finally, with a trembling sigh, she handed the letter to him. "You should read it." "I can't." Poirot accepted it with great care, as though it were a fragile relic. The guests leaned forward unconsciously, breath held. Poirot read silently, his expression growing more grave with each line. When he finished, he folded the letter neatly and held it between his fingertips. "This is most revealing," he said quietly. Haverton stepped closer. "What does it say?" Poirot turned to the inspector but did not yet hand him the letter. "It appears that Mr. Wyndham suspected he was being blackmailed." A stir swept through the hall, whispers, sharp inhalations, the rustle of fabric. Julia covered her mouth. "I didn't know. He never told me," Poirot continued. The letter states that Simon believed someone within his social circle, someone here tonight, had uncovered certain secrets of his past. Secrets he feared would ruin him if exposed. He had asked his sister to safeguard the letter should anything happen to him. Felix Greymore closed his eyes briefly, as though bracing himself. Sir Hugo muttered, "Blackmail?" The gall of him. Wyndham was not precisely a saint. He had secrets aplenty. "Indeed he did, Sir Hugo," Poirot replied, "and someone wished to profit from them." Miss Penrose let out a strained whisper. But blackmail? It could have been anyone. Everyone knew Simon played fast and loose with his money. "Not everyone," Poirot said gently. "Only those with motivation and knowledge. Blackmail requires private information, someone with access, someone with proximity." Lady Ashcombe, who had remained motionless throughout, finally spoke. "Poirot, what was he being blackmailed about exactly?" Poirot's expression softened with pity. "That, madame, the letter does not say. Only that Simon feared it would lead to scandal." Lionel Ashcombe scoffed lightly. "And so he panicked. Wyndham was spineless when faced with consequences." Poirot's eyes flicked toward Lionel, observing the man's unruffled demeanor, the ease with which he judged the dead. But he let the comment pass. Julia leaned forward, her voice breaking. "He wrote that he meant to confront the matter tonight, that he would deal with the blackmailer privately." Poirot nodded. "And therefore, mademoiselle, he arranged a meeting." A hush fell over the room. Inspector Haverton frowned. "Are you saying he planned to meet the blackmailer in the study?" "I believe so," Poirot replied. "He asked Lady Ashcombe for a private audience later, but that was a ruse. He did not intend to confide in her. It was misdirection. Wyndham arranged 2 appointments, one announced, one secret." Julia swallowed. He was afraid. "Fear," Poirot said softly, "is often the shadow that precedes violence." He paced a few steps, thinking aloud. Wyndham confronted his blackmailer in the study. They argued. Perhaps he refused to pay. Perhaps he threatened to expose the blackmailer. In such a moment, passions flare. A weapon is seized. A life is ended. Dr. Rowan Pierce, who had been silent until now, spoke in his calm, measured tone. If he feared for his life, he should have spoken to the authorities. Poirot tilted his head. "You knew him well, Doctor." "I introduced him to certain investors," Pierce replied carefully. "I warned him to be cautious, but Simon always believed he could charm or bargain his way out of any danger." Poirot regarded him with interest. A man who believes himself invincible may be blind to the dangers closest to him. Felix Greymore, his voice strained, suddenly interjected. "If Wyndham was being blackmailed, who had the leverage? That's what you should be asking, Poirot." "Quite so," Poirot said. His gaze swept the room, pausing deliberately on each guest. Faces stiffened under the scrutiny. Someone here knew of a secret in Mr. Wyndham's life, one powerful enough to coerce money, favors, or silence. Someone who knew he would resist, and threatened him further. Someone he feared enough to confide in no one. Poirot stepped back toward Julia, handing her the folded letter. "You are right to keep this, mademoiselle. It may yet save another life." Her eyes widened. "Another?" Poirot inclined his head gravely. "When a blackmailer's greed exceeds prudence, murder is only the beginning." The guests stiffened in horror. Poirot continued, "Simon's death was not an impulsive act. No, it was a decisive act, meant to silence a threat. And such a person, déjà, is not finished. Blackmailers fear exposure, and there are others here who may know pieces of the truth." Lady Ashcombe clutched the back of a chair, pale but composed. "Poirot, what are you saying?" "I'm saying, madame," Poirot replied softly, "that we must be exceedingly careful. The killer tonight is not merely protecting a secret, but eliminating anyone who might uncover it." He turned toward the darkened window, where rain lashed the glass. "And déjà," he whispered. "I fear the next move has already been set, in motion." A gust of wind slammed against the tall windows, the sound echoing through the hall like a warning knell. The guests flinched, glancing uneasily toward the shadowed glass, as if expecting the storm itself to burst inside. Poirot, however, remained perfectly still, his expression sharpened with a focus that not even thunder could disturb. Julia Wyndham clutched the letter tightly to her chest. "Another life?" she whispered. "Poirot, you truly think the killer will strike again?" "My dear mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his tone gentle but firm, "one who commits murder to protect a secret does not stop at one. Murder is like opening a door. Once stepped through, it is difficult to return." Inspector Haverton straightened, his voice gruff. "If the killer plans another attack, we'll put a stop to it. I've got constables posted at every exit, every corridor. No one's getting anywhere near another guest without us knowing." Poirot gave a small, thoughtful hum. "Your precautions are admirable, Inspector. Yet let us not underestimate a murderer's ingenuity. When fear and cunning mingle, they make for a dangerous elixir." A faint tremor rippled through Lady Ashcombe's composure. "Monsieur Poirot, what must we do?" "We must not disperse," Poirot said, turning toward her, "for in separation lies danger. The killer thrives in isolation. Here, where eyes watch every movement, they are uneasy. That is to our advantage." Sir Hugo let out a humorless laugh. "Charming. So we stand about in a crowd, while one of us sharpens the proverbial knife." Poirot turned his sharp gaze upon him. "The murderer will not strike while all are present. Murder is intimate. It requires proximity and privacy. Fear not, Sir Hugo. For now, we are safe." Sir Hugo muttered something that sounded far from reassured, but he said nothing further. Felix Greymore, pale and visibly shaken, leaned against a column. "Poirot, if Simon was blackmailed, there must be clues. Proof, records. Did he keep anything? A ledger? Correspondence?" Poirot's moustaches twitched faintly. An excellent question, and one I too ponder. But you forget, Monsieur Greymore. Someone searched his study. Someone removed the key from his person and attempted to hide or destroy evidence." Felix swallowed hard. "Then whoever has that key had direct access to the motive," Poirot finished. "Yes, a key, monsieur, is a symbol. Access, control, and in our case, guilt." Miss Penrose spoke up suddenly, her voice trembling despite its velvet softness. "Poirot, the guests, the servants, even the staff outside, anyone might have taken it." Poirot turned toward her, his eyes sharp as twin needles. "No, mademoiselle. The staff have been questioned by the inspector and accounted for. Moreover, Mr. Wyndham was found but minutes after his death. The killer could not risk wandering the corridors. No, only someone who could reasonably linger near him without suspicion. Someone within this circle could have taken that key." Miss Penrose faltered beneath his steady gaze, her hands twisting in her lap. Poirot's eyes moved on, sweeping the room, observing every twitch, every deflection, every unnecessary gesture. The silence grew taut. Then, unexpectedly, the lights flickered. A chorus of gasps rose from the guests. The chandeliers dimmed for a heartbeat, shuddered with the strain of the storm, then returned to full brightness. But the momentary darkness had cast its chill. Poirot's expression grew even more serious. "The storm worsens. We must act swiftly." Haverton looked impatient. "And how do you intend to identify the blackmailer, then? We're not magicians, Poirot." "Non," Poirot replied calmly. "But we have logic, motive, and psychology." He stepped forward, positioning himself at the center of the hall. The guests drew instinctively closer. "Let us consider, mes amis, what it means to blackmail. The blackmailer must possess a secret, one powerful enough to compel payment. Therefore, the blackmailer knows more of the victim's private affairs than any casual acquaintance could learn. How does one acquire such knowledge? He looked from face to face. Through intimacy, personal or financial, through overheard conversation, through access to private papers or confidences. Julia wiped at her eyes, listening intently. Poirot continued, Mr. Wyndham was a man with many dealings. Business, social, romantic. Perhaps he confided in someone he should not have, or perhaps someone else uncovered information by chance, or by deliberate intrusion. Sir Hugo scoffed. You think someone here snooped into his affairs? Poirot lifted one eyebrow. I think someone did much more than snoop. A murmur swelled, tense and chaotic. Poirot raised a hand, restoring silence instantly. But consider also the second fact, the destruction of evidence. Whoever tore that document and attempted to hide the remains beneath the rug did so in haste. That suggests fear, fear of what might be discovered within. And where there is fear in a murderer, there is urgency. Felix Greymore exhaled shakily, his voice thin. So the murderer knew that Simon kept proof, something damning enough to justify killing him to silence it. Oui, Poirot said softly. And that brings us to the third fact, timing. Mr. Wyndham arranged the meeting tonight. That means the blackmailer expected him, and the private study, an isolated room, was chosen deliberately. If the meeting was secret, how did the killer know to be there? Dr. Pierce spoke for the first time since the letter had been revealed. Unless the blackmailer was the one Simon invited. Poirot turned toward him slowly, nodding. Precisely, Doctor. A confrontation, a demand, a threat, and then violence. Julia let out a soft sob. Lady Ashcombe placed a steadying hand upon her shoulder. Poirot, his voice low and deliberate, continued, So we must ask ourselves, who among you had reason to blackmail Mr. Wyndham? Who knew secrets and feared they would come to light? Who stood to lose the most if Wyndham exposed the truth? Again he swept the room with his gaze. Guests stiffened, eyes darting, breaths held. And then Poirot said something very quietly, but it carried through the charged silence like a spark through powder. Someone here is lying, not merely about where they were tonight, but about who they truly are. A sound broke the silence, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath. Poirot turned toward the source. Julia Wyndham had gone rigid, her eyes fixed not on Poirot but on someone across the room. Her lips parted in shock. Poirot followed her gaze and felt his own expression harden. For the person Julia stared at was watching her with a look that was not fear, but warning. A warning meant to silence her. Poirot stepped forward at once. Mademoiselle, what is it? Julia shook her head violently, trembling. I shouldn't say. Poirot leaned in, voice softened. Your safety depends on it. Another flicker of lightning illuminated the hall. And in that stark flash, Julia blurted out the words that shattered the room's fragile calm. He lied. About everything. Simon didn't trust him. My brother said he wasn't who he claimed to be. The words hung in the air, trembling like the last note of a struck chord. Every head in the hall turned toward Julia, then toward the man she had involuntarily exposed. The atmosphere shifted, no longer merely tense but electric. A secret had been torn open, raw and dangerous. Poirot's gaze followed Julia's trembling stare and settled upon Dr. Rowan Pierce. The physician remained perfectly still. Too still. His face betrayed nothing, no indignation, no surprise, only a composed neutrality that now felt chilling. Inspector Haverton narrowed his eyes. Dr. Pierce, care to explain that? Dr. Pierce's voice, when it came, was smooth as lacquer. Explain what, exactly? A frightened woman's outburst. Miss Wyndham is grieving. She's clearly overwrought. Julia recoiled as if struck. No, I'm not imagining it. Simon said so himself. He told me not to trust you. He said you were involved in something dangerous. Poirot stepped between them, gently but firmly. "Mademoiselle Julia, look at me. When did your brother tell you this?" She pressed her hands together, breath unsteady. "A month ago. We met at my flat." He was agitated. So unlike himself, he said he had uncovered something about Dr. Pierce's identity, and he didn't know what to do. He wouldn't tell me more, only that he needed time to think. Poirot nodded slowly, thoughtfully. Did he say how he had learned this information? No, only that he had checked something and found it didn't match. He said Dr. Pierce wasn't who he claimed to be. A murmur swept through the crowd, fearful, incredulous. Dr. Pierce, however, remained wholly unruffled. And this vague allegation, from a man who frequently exaggerated threats and imagined conspiracies, is supposed to prove something. Poirot raised a hand for silence. Not that he needed to. The entire hall clung to his every movement. "Do not be too quick to dismiss, Doctor," Poirot said softly. "Secrets, once revealed, often appear vague to those who wish them forgotten." Haverton stepped closer, jaw tight. "Let's start with something simple. Identity, Dr. Pierce, submit your credentials, your place of practice, references, documentation, all of it." "Absurd," Pierce replied coolly. "I have nothing to hide. My credentials are at my private residence in London. You're welcome to verify them tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Haverton barked, "is too damn late." Poirot lifted a calming hand. "Inspector, let us not show too much force. A cornered man, he can be dangerous. Let us instead pull the threads calmly, one by one." Then he turned to Dr. Pierce again. "You were introduced to Mr. Wyndham through investment circles, yes?" "Yes," Pierce said. "I have contacts in the city. I recommended several ventures to him." Poirot's eyes shone. "Indeed. And some of those ventures, were they successful?" Dr. Pierce hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Some were, others less so. That is the nature of investing." Poirot tilted his head. "And Mr. Wyndham, did he accuse you of misrepresentation in any of these dealings?" "Certainly not," Julia whispered. "He was going to confront you." Dr. Pierce's calm cracked. "That is a lie." Poirot observed the tension now simmering beneath the doctor's polished facade. His breathing had deepened. A faint sheen of perspiration glistened at his temple. Poirot continued gently, almost soothingly. "Doctor, why were you truly here tonight? Lady Ashcombe tells me you accepted her invitation only this morning." Pierce stiffened. "That is not unusual. I live nearby. A last-minute invitation is perfectly reasonable." "Not when one's connections to the hostess are tenuous at best," Poirot murmured. "Not when one's arrival is so very convenient." Pierce's lips parted in a thin smile. "Are you suggesting I came here to kill Wyndham, that I anticipated the storm, the setting, the perfect isolation?" Poirot regarded him with serene confidence. "Perhaps not the storm, but the isolation. Yes." Sir Hugo spoke up, voice unsteady. "Simon did tell me once he thought someone was following him. I dismissed it as paranoia." "And now?" Charles Lytton asked sharply. Sir Hugo swallowed. "Now, I don't know." The room had grown colder. The storm outside clawed at the windows, each gust seeming to echo the rising turmoil within. Poirot took a small step closer to the doctor. "You see, Dr. Pierce, there is something curious about you. Your clothing, well made but of a slightly outdated cut. Your watch, Swiss but from a line discontinued 5 years ago. Your speech, educated, yes, but occasionally betraying a faint cadence that is not English." Pierce's composure faltered. "This is absurd. And one more thing," Poirot added quietly. "Your hands." The room held its breath. "You claim to be a physician, yet your hands show none of the signs, none of a man who handles instruments daily. Your nails are immaculate, Your skin is uncalloused. The hands, Dr. Pierce, are the hands of someone who writes, or calculates, or counts money, but they are not the hands of a medical man. A ripple of shock swept the hall. Dr. Pierce's jaw clenched. His eyes darted to the nearest exit. Poirot saw it, and so did Heverton. "No sudden moves," the inspector warned. Dr. Pierce straightened, regaining a ghost of his former composure. "Very well. You have questions. Then allow me to answer plainly." He glanced around the room, disdain simmering. Yes, Simon Wyndham approached me about my identity. Yes, he confronted me. And yes, I told him to stay out of affairs he did not understand. Julia gasped, covering her mouth. "But I did not kill him." Poirot held up a finger. "You deny murder, yet you admit deception. Very interesting." A streak of lightning illuminated the hall, casting Dr. Pierce's face into stark relief, a visage suddenly hard and guarded. Poirot studied him a moment longer, then stepped back. "We will return to you, Doctor. Your part in this tapestry is not yet fully revealed." But before another word could be spoken, a scream ripped through the manor, high, sharp, and unmistakably terrified, from somewhere in the west corridor. Guests froze. The air itself seemed to stop. Poirot's eyes flashed. Mon Dieu. Another attack. Haverton drew his revolver, already sprinting toward the sound. Poirot followed close behind, his mind racing, the pieces shifting, aligning, warning. For the killer had struck again, and this time they were not hiding in the shadows, they were moving. The scream had scarcely died before Poirot and Inspector Haverton were halfway down the west corridor, the storm's fury thundering behind them like the pulse of fate itself. Footsteps echoed chaotically behind them as several guests followed, against Poirot's warning, but fear had stripped them of reason. "Keep back," Haverton barked without looking over his shoulder. "No one moves past this point." But curiosity, terror, and suspicion pulled the crowd forward like a tide. Poirot surged ahead, his stride purposeful, eyes sharp. The corridor was dim, the electric lights flickering with each blow of the storm. Far ahead, a door stood open, golden lamplight spilling onto the eye, polished floorboards like a beckoning trail. Inside that room, someone was crying. Poirot was the first to reach the threshold. A maid, young, slight, barely more than a girl, knelt on the floor beside a toppled chair, hands clasped against her mouth. Her sobs came out in jagged breaths, her eyes wide with terror. In the corner of the room, pressed against the writing desk, stood Miss Valerie Penrose. Her face was ghastly white. One hand clutched a bloodied fire iron. Her other hand pointed, trembling toward the collapsed figure near her feet. Felix Graymore. He lay sprawled on the carpet, his hair disheveled, a deep crimson streak across his forehead. His chest rose and fell faintly, alive, but unconscious. Poirot stepped forward gently. "Miss Penrose, put down the iron." Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. I didn't mean..." He startled me. He came at me. I thought, "Oh, God. I didn't mean..." Poirot held up a calming hand. "Slowly, mademoiselle. Slowly. You are safe. No one accuses you of violence yet, but you must release the iron." Her fingers loosened reluctantly. The fire iron clattered onto the carpet, sending a metallic ring through the room that seemed to stretch far too long. Inspector Haverton knelt beside Felix, checking for a pulse. "He's alive. Unconscious, but alive." He turned a sharp eye on Valerie. "Explain yourself. Now." Valerie swallowed, pulling her shawl tightly around her, as if shielding herself from her own actions. I came to fetch my handbag. I'd left it here after dinner. When I entered the room, Mr. Graymore was already inside. He closed the door behind me and locked it." The maid, still trembling, gave a small, startled nod, corroboration through terror. Valerie continued, voice cracking. He said he needed to speak with me privately, that Poirot's questions were dangerous, that people were turning against him. Then he asked if I still cared for him. Her throat tightened. Said I was the only one he could trust. A beat. He was frantic. Inspector Haverton grunted. Graymore panicked. Guilt catching up with him, perhaps. But Poirot's eyes remained fixed on Valerie, studying her, not the scene. And then, mademoiselle, Poirot prompted gently. Valerie's hands shook violently. He grabbed my arm. I cried out. The maid heard me and rushed in. Felix whirled toward her and... He looked mad. I reached for the iron, just to protect myself, and he charged at me. I swung without thinking. I didn't mean to hurt him so badly. Poirot moved closer, examining the placement of the wound, the angle, the blood spatter. He shook his head softly. No, mademoiselle. You did not strike him with force enough to kill. The injury is glancing. A defensive strike. That much is clear. Valerie let out a sob. I thought, after what happened to Simon, Poirot touched her wrist lightly, reassuring. Courage. No one here wishes to harm you. Haverton rose, wiping his hands on a handkerchief. Graymore needs a doctor, and, he added pointedly, we may need to question him as soon as he wakes. Poirot nodded. But not yet. For now, let him rest. And Miss Penrose, she too must rest. Terror can obscure truth. Lady Ashcombe, pale and silent, had arrived with the others, and upon seeing Valerie's state, she gently guided the woman toward a chair. Meanwhile, Poirot slowly circled the room. His footsteps were soft, deliberate. Something was wrong. There was fear in Valerie's account, real, palpable. But there was also something missing, some detail that should be present, and was not. Poirot paused beside the writing desk. A notepad sat upon it. Several sheets torn away cleanly, but one still faintly imprinted with writing. Poirot leaned close, lips pressing into a thoughtful line. He picked up a pencil and gently shaded over the pad's surface, revealing the ghost of the words pressed into the paper by a heavy hand. His eyes narrowed. Meet me. We must finish this. If you say one word, I will. The rest trailed off. Poirot exhaled slowly. Another threat, another meeting arranged. But this message, judging by the slanted, hurried indentation, was meant to be anonymous. No signature. He turned, eyes moving from the message to Felix Graymore's unconscious form. Felix did not write this. The hand was wrong, too forceful, too broad. Poirot's mind sharpened like a blade. Someone else had summoned Felix here, someone afraid he might reveal more under questioning. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the shadows at the edge of the room, and for a heartbeat, just one, he thought he saw a figure withdraw into the hallway. No, more a suggestion of motion, the whisper of presence. Haverton noticed Poirot's sudden tension. What is it? Poirot straightened. Inspector, there is something dark moving in this house. Someone who manipulates fear as a fisherman casts bait into water. You think Graymore was lured here, that this wasn't random? Oui, Poirot murmured. He was summoned. This meeting was designed, and it very nearly ended in his death. Not by Miss Penrose's hand, but by clever orchestration. Haverton swore under his breath. So our killer isn't done yet. On the contrary, Poirot said softly. They grow bolder. The room had become stiflingly silent. Poirot turned back to the gathered guests in the corridor. Their faces, lit in the flickering glow of the hallway lamps, showed fear and something else. Something more dangerous. Suspicion, in one another, in themselves. Poirot exhaled deeply. We must return to the great hall, he said. The killer thrives in shadows. We will deprive them of darkness. As the guests began to drift back toward the central hall, Poirot paused at the threshold, one hand braced on the door frame, His mind flew through the night's patterns, the lies, the fear, the secrets, the shifting alibis, and now a second attack, cleverly disguised as panic. The murderer was close. Very close. And as Poirot re-entered the hall, he knew with absolute certainty the next moment of truth was approaching, and when it came, it would strike like lightning. The guests, rattled and pale, returned to the great hall like survivors of a storm dragged back to shore. The atmosphere had changed irrevocably. Fear had grown teeth. Every whisper felt like a threat, every glance suspicious, every step measured. Somewhere among them, a predator moved with increasing boldness. Poirot closed the doors behind the group with a quiet but decisive click, sealing them once more into the glittering cage of Belgrave Court. The storm outside battered the windows as if trying to force its way inside, each gust a reminder that nature itself seemed conspiring to keep them trapped together. Inspector Haverton signaled his men to stand guard at each entrance. No one would be permitted to wander. No more isolated corridors, no concealed corners. Yet even as Haverton took control with the confidence of authority, all eyes remained fixed on Poirot, the small, still figure whose mind was dissecting every lie that had passed through the room tonight. Poirot stepped forward, clasping his hands behind his back. His voice, when he spoke, was softer than the hum of the wind, yet it carried with perfect clarity. Mes amis. What happened in the West Corridor was not an accident born of panic. It was orchestrated. A ripple passed through the room, murmurs, gasps, the hard silence of those trying too carefully not to react. The message written into the pad in that room, Poirot continued, was meant to summon Monsieur Greymoor, to isolate him, to create the opportunity for a violent confrontation. Valerie Penrose flinched, her face pale but resolute. Felix Greymoor, now conscious but weak and supported by a constable, watched Poirot with hollow, haunted eyes. "But why lure Felix?" Lady Ashcombe asked, her voice strained. "What could he have known?" "Not what he knew," Poirot replied. "What someone feared he might know." He paced slowly across the gleaming marble, each step measured. The blackmailer, whoever they are, acted tonight with desperation. After I began questioning the guests, they feared certain truths were beginning to unravel. They needed to silence Monsieur Greymoor before he revealed what he had hinted at earlier, that Simon Wyndham intended to expose someone. Charles Lytton crossed his arms. "Why Greymoor? He's a man in debt, not a genius detective." Poirot paused and turned toward him, because Monsieur Greymoor had a conversation with Simon earlier this evening, a conversation he did not fully disclose. He said Simon laughed at him in the conservatory. I believe Simon said something more, something that suggested he knew about more than art deals or failing investments. Felix's lips parted as though he wanted to deny it, but exhaustion and fear sealed his silence. Poirot resumed pacing. Our murderer feared that Felix might have overheard or deduced something important. Thus, they arranged the meeting in the West Corridor, and when Mademoiselle Penrose defended herself, they were given an unexpected gift: chaos. Valerie sobbed into her hands, guilt washing over her, though Poirot had already cleared her. "And now," Poirot continued softly, "the killer knows their time grows short. They will strike again if given the chance." Inspector Haverton's voice rumbled. "Then let's bring the bastard out. Name your suspect, Poirot. You've got enough evidence to corner them." Poirot stopped walking. The air tightened as though every molecule strained to hear the next breath. "Not yet," Poirot said quietly. "This murderer is intelligent, dangerous, and they believe themselves unseen. If I accuse too soon, without revealing their final damning mistake, they may lash out like a trapped animal." Sir Hugo snorted nervously. "Then what? We wait for them to pick us off one by one?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "No. We force their hand. We compel them to reveal themselves." He turned toward Julia Wyndham, who stood trembling like a candle in a draught. Before Simon died, Poirot said, he attempted to tell someone the truth. It is why he reached for the telephone, why he wished to speak with Lady Ashcombe later, why he wrote the letter to his sister. Julia nodded weakly. He said someone wasn't who they claimed to be. Poirot lifted a finger. Oui. And tonight, that person revealed themselves, quite unintentionally. A hush fell so total that the storm outside seemed to retreat. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. By pressing too hard on Felix Greymore. Every guest froze. Even Felix blinked in confusion. Poirot continued. When someone panics at the possibility of exposure, they act rashly. They make mistakes. For instance, he turned slowly toward the center of the hall, toward the guests grouped near the fireplace. They might write a threatening note on a notepad in a room they themselves chose. A soft gasp. Poirot's eyes locked on one individual now. His tone sharpened with finality. They might forget that pressure leaves impressions on paper, revealing their distinctive handwriting. The guests followed his gaze, one by one, like dominoes tipping. Charles Lytton stiffened, then stepped back. Poirot's voice was calm, unyielding. Monsieur Charles Lytton, would you care to explain why the threatening note bears handwriting identical to your own journalism drafts? Lytton's face drained of all color. This is preposterous. Poirot, your accusations are wild. Wild? No. Poirot stepped closer. You were the one Simon Wyndham confided in the most, not because he trusted you, but because you manipulated him. You knew his finances, his secrets. You intended to publish an exposé that would destroy him. But instead of writing a story, you saw an opportunity. Lytton backed against the mantel, breath quickening. You blackmailed him, Poirot said softly. And when he resisted, when he discovered you were not merely a reporter, but a man with gambling debts, with falsified credentials, you killed him. Lady Ashcombe gasped. Julia covered her mouth. Felix stared in disbelief. Haverton's hand dropped to his revolver. Poirot finished, voice like steel. You struck him with a decanter. You took the key from his chain. You destroyed the incriminating document in the study. And tonight, you attempted to silence Felix Greymore. Lytton's eyes darted wildly. No, I only... He lunged, straight for Poirot. Haverton fired a warning shot into the air. Guests screamed, but Poirot did not flinch. Charles Lytton halted, panting, trapped between the barrel of Haverton's gun and the unyielding calm of Poirot's gaze. Then, with a broken cry, he dropped to his knees. It wasn't supposed to happen, he choked. He knew too much. He was going to ruin me. I needed just a little money, just time. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Murder, monsieur, is never about time. It is about choice. Haverton stepped forward, placing handcuffs on Lytton's shaking wrists. The hall exhaled as one. Fur draining, replaced by something fragile, tentative. Relief. Poirot smiled softly, though sadness lingered beneath it. And now, he whispered, we have order once more. But the storm outside raged on, as though the night itself was reluctant to let the truth settle. The storm clawed at the windows as though unwilling to release Belgrave Court from its grasp. Even with Charles Lytton on his knees, handcuffed and broken, there lingered in the air a tension that refused to dissolve, a sense that the night itself had not yet finished speaking. Poirot did not move at once. He regarded Lytton with a thoughtful stillness, the kind that suggested not triumph, but contemplation. His eyes drifted not toward the fallen man, but toward the watching guests, faces strained by fear, disbelief, and exhaustion. Inspector Haverton hauled Lytton to his feet. "You'll answer for Wyndham's death," he growled. Lytton shook his head wildly, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean to kill him. I only wanted to scare him. He was going to publish something about me, expose those debts, destroy my career." Poirot lifted one hand. No, no, monsieur. You wanted silence. You wanted control. Murder is never an accident when one strikes a man from behind while he reaches for help. Lytton shuddered and looked away. Haverton signaled 2 constables to escort him out, but before they could move, Poirot spoke again. "One moment, Inspector." Haverton paused. "What now?" Poirot stepped closer to Lytton, tilting his head. "You have confessed to blackmail, to striking Simon Wyndham, to summoning Monsieur Graymore. And yet—" A collective breath caught in the hall. Poirot continued, each word deliberate. "One piece remains unexplained. The matter of Dr. Rowan Pierce." All eyes snapped toward the physician. Pierce stood near the edge of the group, hands clasped behind him. His expression did not shift, not a tremor of fear, not a flicker of guilt. He seemed merely expectant. Lytton blinked in confusion. "Pierce, I have nothing to do with him." Poirot nodded gently. "Just so. Which is precisely the point. Simon Wyndham feared 2 men, not one. The blackmailer, yes, but also another, entirely separate threat. A man whose entire persona is fiction." Pierce's eyes narrowed. "Poirot!" "Do not interrupt, Doctor," Poirot said softly. "I have observed you, your hands, your speech, your clothing, and your reactions. Subtle, but not invisible." Julia Wyndham trembled. "Simon said he wasn't who he claimed to be." Poirot inclined his head. "And Simon was correct." Haverton's jaw clenched. "Are you saying Pierce had a role in the murder?" "No," Poirot replied calmly. "Not in the murder, but in Wyndham's fear and in the secret that made him vulnerable to Charles Lytton's exploitation." A murmur rippled through the hall. Dr. Pierce remained unnervingly still. Poirot stepped closer until they stood scarcely a foot apart. "You are not a physician. You never were. Your credentials, as you claim, are in London. But you avoid mentioning which hospital, which institution, which colleagues." Pierce's voice remained measured. "I see no need to justify myself under accusation without proof." "No." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then allow me to provide it." He gestured toward the injured Felix Graymore. "When Monsieur Graymore was struck, you, doctor, did not move to examine him, not even out of instinct. A true physician responds to the injured without hesitation." Pierce's jaw tightened. Poirot continued, unfaltering. "And earlier, when Simon Wyndham was found dead, you observed the wound from a distance and said nothing of its nature. Most physicians would comment, even briefly, on the violence of the blow, but you remained silent." Dr. Pierce was no longer calm. A pulse ticked sharply at his temple. Poirot pressed on. "No physician wears cufflinks engraved with a foreign banking house. No physician retains the slight tan line of a ring worn until recently. Yet there is no mention of a spouse." He leaned nearer, voice dropping to a whisper that carried nonetheless through the hall. "And no physician carries in his inner jacket pocket a small silver key identical in shape and weight to the one removed from Simon Wyndham's watch. Chain." A gasp erupted. Haverton's eyes blazed. "What key?" Poirot extended his hand silently. "If you would, Doctor." Pierce didn't move. Poirot sighed. "Très bien. Inspector Haverton, kindly search the gentleman." Pierce lunged, not toward Poirot, but toward the far corridor, a desperate bolt for freedom. Haverton sprang after him, tackling him before he'd taken 3 steps. Guests cried out. Lady Ashcombe clutched the back of a chair. Julia Wyndham collapsed into tears. Within moments, Pierce was pinned, his jacket seized, and the small silver key removed from the inner pocket. Haverton held it up. This matches the imprint on Wyndham's chain." Julia stared, stricken with betrayal. "Simon trusted you. He thought you were helping him." Poirot shook his head softly. "Dr. Pierce, or whatever your true name may be, was never Wyndham's friend. He was the source of the information that made Wyndham a target. He fed him investment tips, yes, but he also fed him danger. Simon discovered the truth, that this man was an impostor inside their financial circle, and in threatening to expose him, he unwittingly revealed his own vulnerability, the very vulnerability Lytton exploited. Pierce's expression darkened like a storm cloud. Wyndham should have kept his mouth shut. Poirot lifted a brow. And that, monsieur, is why he feared you. You did not kill him, no, but you set the stage for his death. Your lies created the leverage Lytton seized upon. Your presence made Wyndham desperate and secretive. You are not a murderer, but you are no innocent. Haverton snapped handcuffs onto Pierce's wrists. Impersonation, fraud, and whatever else turns up when we check your real identity. Pierce said nothing, his silence a cold admission. Poirot watched him taken away, then turned back to the shaken assembly. And now, mes amis, the night's shadows withdraw. He offered Julia a gentle bow. Your brother's fear was justified. His clarity, tragically, came too late. Yet because of him, justice is done. Julia nodded through tears. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Ashcombe approached, placing a trembling hand on Poirot's arm. Belgrave Court owes you more than thanks. Poirot smiled softly. Madame, order is its own reward. The storm outside began at last to soften, the wind settling, the rain easing into a gentle patter. Poirot glanced toward the window, his expression reflective. It is curious, he said quietly, how truth often arrives like a storm. Violent, unwelcome, but cleansing. Haverton let out a weary sigh. Well, Poirot, I'll never doubt your little grey cells again. Poirot gave a modest shrug. It is not the brain alone, Inspector. It is the heart. To understand a crime, one must understand human nature, its greed, its fear, its wounded pride. He paused. And its sorrow. The guests stood in exhausted silence. Poirot retrieved his hat and gloves with immaculate composure. And now, mes amis, if you will excuse me, I will take my leave. The storm clears, and dawn will soon approach. Hercule Poirot must not keep the sun waiting. He stepped toward the doors as Belgrave Court slowly breathed again, restored at last to its fragile, precious order. Behind him, the night exhaled the last of its secrets. The dawn crept quietly over Belgrave Court, casting long, softened beams across the once chaotic hall. The storm that had raged through the night was now nothing more than a memory. Its fury spent, its secrets scattered and powerless in the clear morning light. The guests, haggard and hollow-eyed, lingered in small clusters, waiting for some final assurance that the nightmare truly was over. Poirot stood near the grand fireplace, hands lightly clasped behind his back, observing the slow return of order with a serene expression. Inspector Haverton had taken Charles Lytton and the false Dr. Pierce into custody. The constables, relieved of their tense vigil, now moved efficiently through the manor, gathering statements and securing evidence. Lady Ashcombe hovered nearby, her usual poise restored but touched by the fragility born of a night such as this. Julia Wyndham approached Poirot tentatively, her grief softened into a weary calm. Monsieur Poirot, she said gently, I do not know how to thank you. Simon, he was complicated, yes, but he did not deserve such an end. If you had not uncovered the truth. Poirot inclined his head, his expression gentle. Mademoiselle, your brother was a man who saw his own faults too late. Yet he attempted to make amends. His letter to you, his wish to set things right, these were the acts of a man seeking redemption. It is a tragedy that he did not have time to complete this journey. Julia's eyes glistened. Do you think he found peace in the end? Poirot paused thoughtfully. Perhaps. But more importantly, he has now been granted justice. And that, mademoiselle, is the truest peace the living can give the dead. She stepped back, pressing the letter close to her heart. Lady Ashcombe approached next, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. "Poirot, Belgrave Court has seen scandals. Yes, but never such darkness. You handled it with grace, where others might have faltered." Poirot offered a small bow. "Madame, I merely observed what was already before us. The guilty reveal themselves not only by their deeds, but by the shadows they cast. It is my task only to follow those shadows until they find the light." Behind them, Felix Graymore, bandaged but upright, approached with Miss Penrose at his side. Valerie offered Poirot a tremulous smile. "You saved us, monsieur. If you had not arrived, if you had not seen what others missed, Felix might have been the next victim." Felix nodded, humbled. "I was a fool. I thought my pride more important than truth. Wyndham tried to warn me, in his way. I owe you a debt I cannot repay." Poirot lifted a hand in polite dismissal. "Ah, but no debt is necessary. You will repay it in how you live your life, monsieur. You will avoid the vanity and desperation that led you so close to destruction. Let this night be your turning point." Graymore bowed his head, deeply moved. Poirot stepped away from the group and surveyed the hall one last time. In the softened morning light, the devastation of the night seemed distant, like the fading traces of a bad dream. Yet he knew well that human failings and passions were not so easily washed away. Inspector Haverton approached, hands on his hips, his expression somewhere between admiration and disbelief. "Well, Poirot," he said gruffly, "you were right from the start. The psychology, the contradictions, all those little details. I would have chased red herrings all night if you hadn't pointed them out." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, Inspector, you underestimate yourself. You have the instincts, yes. But you must learn to trust not only what the eyes see, but what the mind whispers." Haverton snorted. "My mind mostly whispers that I should retire early." Poirot chuckled softly. "Then whisper it should, after the paperwork for this case is complete." Haverton groaned as Poirot patted his arm. With the first rays of true sunlight gleaming through the crystal windows, Poirot retrieved his hat and adjusted it with careful precision. He smoothed his mustache, ensuring each end curved impeccably. Lady Ashcombe escorted him to the front doors. "Will you stay for breakfast, Monsieur Poirot? After all you've done, it's the least we can offer." Poirot shook his head with a smile. "Alas, madame, I must decline. Justice has been restored at Belgrave Court, but there are many more places where the order is not yet as it should be. Hercule Poirot must go where he is needed." She nodded, understanding. As he stepped outside, the fresh air was crisp, tinged with the scent of wet earth and the promise of a new day. The sky glowed pale gold above the trees, their leaves glistening with the last remnants of the night's storm. Poirot paused at the top of the steps, turning back to offer a final reflection. "You know," he said softly, "human nature never ceases to fascinate me. It is capable of such beauty, but also such deception. In the end, it is not the great puzzles or the complicated schemes that test us. It is the heart, for there, in the smallest corner, lies the truth." With that, Hercule Poirot descended the steps of Belgrave Court, his polished shoes clicking quietly against the stone path. As he walked toward the waiting car sent from London, the morning sun broke fully through the clouds, casting a bright, steady beam over the estate, like a final blessing upon a house that had endured darkness and now stood once more in the light. And with impeccable composure, Poirot tipped his hat to the dawn and disappeared down the road, leaving only order in his wake.